But we have a process where we can say, hey, Mr. Grower, I know you have amazing product. I know you want it to stop there. You just want it bought, and you want to know you have a futures contract and somebody's going to come along and buy your product. Hello, Mr. Retailer. I know that you have people coming in every day saying, what do you recommend? And your bud tenders don't know what to recommend. Here's a product that competes with all of these at $1 less. And here's all the reasons why. It's local. You've got me to contact, etc. Okay, Chuck, so you've done their job. You've done their job. Now you're bridging the gap and you're making the space a little more navigatable for, pardon me, that's not a word, for those two sides of the spectrum.
Hey, Brayden Sutton, CEO of the BC Bud Co. Great to have you here on the show with us. How are you doing today, sir?
I am good, David. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I look forward to chatting a bit about the BC Bud Co. A lot to talk about here. I think the company is incredibly unique, and certainly I'm excited to be able to spotlight you guys here with our viewers and listeners. And so with that in mind, want to give you an opportunity, maybe kick things off with giving us an elevator pitch, if you will, for the BC Bud Co., just to give folks out there a brief overview of who the company is, what you guys are involved in. We'll jump into some more in-depth topics later about the heritage of the company, as well as its very unique business model. But if you could just give us an overview, we're jumping in the elevator, headed to the 35th floor. So you've got the floor right now.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, yeah, we very much are a house of brands. We're a founder-led group, three guys in particular that have been around the space a very long time commercially, going back to the 90s. I was involved in the Canadian medical side back in 2004. So a self-funded, really qualified group in the space. I hate to say it like that, but we are a contract manufacturer model, sort of a licensing model, whereby we enable we provide our strains to the growers. They grow for us under our protocols. It goes off to process, goes to the province, and then it ships out. And we're in about 500 stores with about 4 different brands right now, and about 30 different products covering everything from rosin, infused pre-rolls, regular pre-rolls, various bag formats. We have vape carts and soon to be beverages as well. And we are in edibles with canna beans and canna almonds. So we really touch kind of all the value segments, guys that have done it before and created a lot of really valuable offerings in the space, and guys that really know how to get shelf space, earn it, build the trust, and really connect with the consumer, and have a model that's light and nimble and allows us to kind of evolve with this space, because it's never a static industry, never has been.
Yeah, and that light and nimble model that you referenced, I mean, that really stems from this approach that the company has taken, which I think is a unique approach in that you don't farm the product itself. Instead, you go out, you find who is farming the best and highest quality products out there, and you work with them. So kind of shed some light, if you will, on that unique approach, why the company chose that approach, and how you feel it gives the company a potentially unique advantage out there in a growingly competitive market sector right now.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, we've got, great companies to point to, Coca-Cola, Red Bull, that have used this model to get into new areas, essentially find a facility, turn it on the way they want it, provide their protocols, their packaging, all of their processes. So we've essentially taken a model that works really well. In cannabis, people often say, well, where's your grow or where's your store? Failing to understand that there's the agricultural side, of course. There's, of course, the consumer retail division, soon to be consumption lounges, which will be quite exciting. But in the middle, you do have these brands that essentially, float around from retail to retail. They can come out of any facility. There's no linchpin. There's no way to kind of box them in, because myself, to go back, I built one of the biggest facilities in North America back in 2013. We knew back then that bigger, it was a race for big. Ultimately, when there's a few more than a million, there was about a few million square feet, pardon me, of cultivation space already up in Canada, with about 38 million Canadians, maybe 10% of them are smoking cannabis consumers. So realized early on that it's very oversaturated. It's going to be a race to the bottom. Wholesale gram rate back then was about $8. We're now like $1.50, to give you an example of how extreme the price has fallen. So we knew that we want to lift up these good producers. We don't want to see these mom and pop craft guys go away. They need help. Traditionally, the farmers and the licensed producers are not marketers. They don't understand how to get listings. They don't understand media, broadly speaking. They don't understand doing pop-ups in stores and product knowledge sessions in stores. They don't understand connecting with the consumer. So we're kind of a bridge. We thought, well, how do we sort of, again, enable all the really good growers, work well with all the really good retailers, and really uplift the space, and again, do it in a way that's a value add. So we're not putting any redundant offerings on the shelf. We're saying, where's the holes, where's the gaps, what's hot in LA Valley, for example. If we're talking about Vancouver, BC, there's usually about an 8 or 10 year lag from the LA Valley all the way up the coast. And so ultimately knowing how to get in front of it, produce and supply things to people that are going to go into the store and ask for it by name. And we've been able to do so. It's very important to note that we've done it without the use of paying these data fees. So currently there is a real issue in the space, not just the oversupply in the back of the product, but these retail stores are saying, hey, there's 200, 250 brands I could buy from. What are you going to do for me? So the producer ends up paying data fees to basically gain access to intel to buy shelf space. So what happened in the beginning was the big guys came out, big budget, Bay Street and House Street, and all the mania came in and flooded in the money. Everybody had money to spend. So they bought shelf space. They didn't earn it. And what we've done is we've earned spot by spot and store by store. So we're really, again, building a brand with generational cannabis in mind. Like there's really no notable people in Canada at the moment, despite it being a $4+ billion legal industry, and realistically probably like a $10 billion illegal industry still with the black market. So there's a lot of catalysts in the future from the point of the black market slowly making its way into the legal framework. So just guys that understand really the landscape macro, that understand the consumption side, because it's a very picky consumer. The value has to be there price-wise, which we understand. But, if we can get a brand out let's say we have one listing at $100,000 a month, like very modest to achieve. You get 30 or 40 of those listings, you've got yourself a pretty good going concern. But in doing so, you're not adding more staff, you're not adding more CapEx, there's no extra leases, there's no extra distribution or logistics from a growing point of view. You're simply procuring that product as you grow. So I'd like to think that we've somewhat hacked the space in Canada. It's not a perfect model, but it does work, and it allows us to grow without increasing our cost of doing business.
Sounds like you guys have cut out the fat. And I think that's important, because just based on my own observations, in following the cannabis sector here across North America for the past few years, I've seen companies try to take on a little bit too much. And yes, their intentions were great, but trying to bite off more than you can chew doesn't always end up well. But it seems like you've taken an approach that is, let's run lean and let's move methodically versus let's just go out there and grab everything that we can get our hands on. Is that more or less kind of the approach that you have taken? And if so, I really want to drill down into how that creates a unique advantage for the company, because I think right now, with this being such a competitive space, there's a lot of companies out there that those in the investment community can take a look at. But I think this is an area that really makes the BC Budco incredibly unique. So I really want to, if we can, just take a little bit more time to dive deeper into the business model and how it really does help set you apart from other companies out there.
Totally, and thank you for that. So to go back again to answer the question, a reason I brought up Supreme, which was the 7-acre facility, about 360,000 square feet, is the trend. What was trending, what was financeable was bigger is better. Less than a year later, what was trending was purpose built. So then I'm focused on Alberta. Aurora came to be. Aurora created the first purpose built, modest 250,000 square feet, not modest at all. But back then it went, okay, we need to be purpose built. Then they quickly realized you can't control the environment. You can't put out this craft made with love, mom and pop out of these Costco's. It just doesn't work. There's no economies of scale with craft. Once you start to expand out on that scale, you can't control quality. So what the industry has done to date, my point being, is that it's been reactive. It's been knee-jerk industry. We need to do
Yeah.
this. We need to do this. We need to do this. We need to get into CO2 extraction. We need to get into, infused live rosin. Like, it's always reactionary. What Josh Taylor and myself are doing with this company is we're building a business. So started out as a Privco, a very intentional Privco based on many decades of combined work on the ground in the space. And we said, okay, well, who's the best grower? Okay, got them. Walk in. How do we negotiate a program? Done. Who are the top 10 stores we like? Okay, let's go tomorrow. We go to each store. We give them the information. We say, here's what we can offer. So we built it truly brick by brick, as a sustainable business that we can continue to expand on and take the model to Alberta. We're now in 6 provinces, by the way. We'll soon be in the US, I hope, on a licensing front, and then globally. But we have a process where we can say, hey, Mr. Grower, I know you have amazing product. I know you want it to stop there. You just want it bought, and you want to know you have a futures contract and somebody's going to come along and buy your product. Hello, Mr. Retailer. I know that you have people coming in every day saying, what do you recommend? And your bud tenders don't know what to recommend. Here's a product that competes with all of these at $1 less. And here's all the reasons why. It's local. You've got me to contact, etc. Okay, Chuck. So you've done their job. You've done their job. Now you're bridging the gap and you're making the space a little more navigatable pardon me, that's not a word, for those two sides of the spectrum.
Yeah.
We also very intentionally kind of back this into a CPC, or a pubco, that I had with Mark Lustig. Mark had just sold Origin House for 1.1 billion US to Cresco Labs. We are a mini Origin House because we are not trying to be cute. We're not trying to go and buy infrastructure. We're trying to be relevant. We're trying to own things that people ask by name. I'm often cognizant, for example, that in 1933 they repealed the Volstead Act. Prohibition was repealed. It was only illegal to consume alcohol, I think, like 12 or 13 years in America. But what happened in 1933 was it didn't flip legal. It was a decade battle from like the gin joints and the rum runners, all the Canadian whiskey coming down from Canada. That didn't go away overnight. So the legal guys that came in when alcohol was repealed, or the prohibition was repealed, they had a 10-year battle. So in Canada, October 2018 was legalization. We're only 4.5 years in. It's unrealistic to think the sector is going to be perfect in 2024. So we know that. So the solution for us was, we have this brand that works. We have a model that works. We're relevant in the industry. We're continuing to expand and get market share. We're helping support the industry. We're helping the consumer. And now we have a public vessel, which we can hopefully go mop up the industry in about a year, when the beautiful brands that were resilient enough to survive did so, and all the original people in the sector have all long but tapped out, and all the creditor protection that we've seen this year in Canada, which I know will happen in the US, sadly, because of 280E and delays that are there. It's tragic what's happening, because they've, in essence, legalized something there on a state level, like in Nevada where you are, but really made it impossible to do business because you still don't have banking privileges. You still don't have the ability to write off staff. Fortunately, in Canada, we don't quite have that, but we still have trouble. You have to explain things to the bank 4 years later. My point being is that it's still a very broken, fragmented industry. So the guys that are able to navigate it today, as long as they can survive and remain capitalized, I think we'll have an incredible, buyer's market of really solid brands, because we can already go buy those facilities for pennies on the dollar. Retail stores are all for sale because they're not making big money. So as Origin House demonstrated, the value is in the brand, is in the middleman. It's in the people that are the conduit, or the connector to make the commerce happen. We're sort of the catalyst of the wheel. So we definitely think we're in the right place. I hope that long-winded answer sort of answers your question, but it was a very thought out model with the 20-year plan in mind, not the moment. It was survive the moment, navigate it, but build this ship for who's going to be the big, liquor brands of 2027. That's still yet to be decided. So
yeah, looking ahead, I think, and how you're going to get from point A to point B, then point C, and so on and so forth, I think is really important here. There's a common misconception, that I found out there, particularly in the investment community, in the public market space of, the cannabis sector here, that the sector itself has kind of hit its ceiling. And, you can understand that, you look at a lot of companies, their values right now, certainly I don't think are reflective of the true potential that I think still exists there. But, we talked about some catalysts, that are still left to potentially happen here. I know here in the United States, the Safe Banking Act could certainly help really kick things off here. We talked about consumption lounges and how those are starting to grow across North America. To anyone out there who is looking at the cannabis space and saying, it's hit its ceiling, doesn't have any room for growth, what would you counter with that?
Yeah, I look, I'm a macro fundamental investor. I consider myself to be a value investor. I've been a student of the markets for now 19 years, hands-on, read all the books that I can get my hands on. So I understand this sort of pendulum effect in the markets that is true, going back to tulip mania, to .com, to real estate, to what we saw with GameStop and AMC. So cannabis experienced an extreme irrational exuberance. It experienced mania. Billions of dollars came in. Extreme FOMO caused everyone to want to be a cannabis investor. So what happened, and this I find fascinating, is it brought out more retail, more mom and pop investors than anything else in the history of the stock market ever, by a massive margin, more than GameStop and AMC, all of it. Cannabis brought more. They all got absolutely wiped out. So now you have the first wave of people came in, had a horrible experience. It's going to be hard to shake that. Fast forward to today, you have an industry that is generating billions and billions of dollars, that's fighting a much bigger black market. But again, it's being chipped away at bit by bit. Take Canada as an easy, quick example. It's about 4 billion in legal sales. You had a collective, I would say 6 billion to 8 billion at the peak, maybe, of the LP market, of just the growers in Canada. That has shrunk dramatically down to probably in the neighborhood of sub 2, maybe 1. So that pendulum has gone too far. So you take Canada as a micro market. Canada is probably not that much bigger than Nevada, ironically, which is why I've always loved the Nevada market. But again, the point being is that if that plus 10 billion is being consumed illegally still, I think that 10 to 20% of that's going to leak into the legal market without a doubt, and then consumption lounges will move up. Further price compression or cheaper pot will also move that up. Further trust, we got to get years away from what Canopy did and Afria and CanTrust, like the big major bankers that polluted into cannabis. The tourists that raised all the money ended up being frauds. Like the industry was worried about the growers in the black market, and the only guys that caused any damage and reeked of all of the bad instances were all bankers. So kind of ironic how that took place. And then the poor gardeners were like, wow, this is a nasty den of thieves. So it's fascinating to say that the capital markets intersected with cannabis. It got the funding. It got way too big too fast. We realized that, whoa, even your daily smoker, I often remind people, the daily pot smoker smokes maybe a gram a day realistically, some 2, which is a lot. It's quite a bit. And that's maybe $20 a day. So that person's maybe 9-10% of the population. Okay, well, it's not a huge number. Again, it's a lot bigger than we're seeing in the legal market because it's not representative with the black market. But I think, again, the opportunities today to invest back in Anheuser-Busch in 1934, when people are kind of like, well, I can just go next door to the gin joint. It's been there a decade. It's cheaper. It's easier. I like Larry, the bartender. So old habits are hard to break. And I think we're still early. I think we're kind of bouncing along the bottom of the space. Like MSOS is a perfect example. I wrote in my book a year and a half ago, I said, don't buy any MSOS calls yet. We're still probably a year or two away out from any real things happening, which will probably be an election matter. Like they'll probably use that, next year on the Democratic side, but there's a reason it hasn't happened yet. And there's things like big pharma and big alcohol, and they push very hard and spend a lot of money to ensure that their market share doesn't get eroded. So Canada, if anything, is a great case study, guinea pig, and it's working great in a sense that, again, the overall sales for the industry have actually gone up every single month exponentially without any real disruption in terms of legal sales numbers. So I think the next many quarters look great. I think we're at the bottom of the barrel in terms of ability for companies to finance. So in other words, it's never been harder. Most of the existing operators are carrying large amounts of interest-bearing debt, like debenture debt, that'll weigh on their share capital, because as they convert, it keeps adding more shares. The stock keeps going down, yet the market cap keeps going up. So it's kind of a perfect storm for a real bottom, which I think we're pretty much in around in the fall. And again, the companies that can navigate, that aren't burning money, that don't have debt, are in a beautiful place. I really do believe.
I agree. And so on that, can you give us a snapshot of the BC Bud Code's financial health situation right now, just to help folks out there understand?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'm very proud to say, as I mentioned, we did go public, so we're a corporate entity because we had a vehicle. So we ended up in a situation where we own the majority of the pubco, myself, Josh Taylor, Mark Lustig, which is very beneficial and advantageous statistically for shareholders. Been the biggest supporters. We self-funded it. The company doesn't have debt. The company is cash flowing. Our all-in corporate burn, to give an example, is like sub 40K, 45K, which you will not find another operating cannabis pubco that doesn't have any leases. That, for example, the management doesn't even have management agreements. There's none of these golden parachute contracts that have plagued the space. There's no RSU issuances, or there's no self-enrichment going on whatsoever in this vehicle, which has been a real challenge. We're about 12, 13 months into sales, did about $1 million in our first year, didn't really lose money. So we're right at that place now, finally, where, because it is a lumpy industry, meaning to say that you don't exactly send to the province, get paid in 10 days. And in the Ontario store, for example, it's a 60-day net. So sales now are finally upwards of the 100K plus monthly. But again, we're demonstrating and proving out a model. We're not trying to buy sales. I think anybody could go and they can buy shelf space. We're trying to create essentially a very sustainable growth pattern in a chart and show people, based on trust and history, that, we've done this before, we're doing it again. It's not a race. This is not a Vancouver moment, or a Toronto moment, which is what happened. This is a marathon. And the guys here are here, they're young and they want to make a big mark in the space. So in good financial shape. Again, I've stressed that we were self-funded, never really did a retail round. So we've got the future to look forward to kind of expand out the shareholder base. But yeah, the company is in great shape overall, and hopefully in a position to be able to start to acquire some of the little guys. But what I'm finding, just from my position, is that even the real gems that are out there, they've all done raises. They have a lot of sort of shareholder fatigue issues, and they all have debt. They all have exorbitant lease rates because they signed back in the mania and they overpaid for their leases. So we're in a good spot in terms of being contracting out as much as we humanly can at the moment.
Yeah, it's a very smart approach. And you mentioned the name Mark Lustig, and I want to take a moment to talk about his involvement here with the company, because I think it says a lot that, he's chosen to become involved here. He's someone that has been involved, in countless cannabis companies over the years. So talk about what Mark's involvement here with the company means, and, how you think it might be beneficial here as you continue to work your way and navigate your way, over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing him up, because he's a big deal, certainly in my mind and others. He's the only guy, in my humble opinion, I've yet to see any other, that has a legitimate, real exit, a cradle to the grave, real cannabis company creation, value creation. Sold that company for over $1 billion. His first pubco, he was also co-founder of Planet 13, probably the best retail store in Vegas. He's the chairman of IMC in Israel, throughout Germany. He's a part of Pharmacello through South America, and he's the director of Cresco Labs in the US, one of the biggest MSOs. So I say that to say he's probably the biggest name in the space. He's got a phenomenal name. He's an amazing human being, deeply connected, and we are, in essence, his Canadian call option. So the BC Budco is where he's placed his bet. I'm in essence his, called the Canadian jockey. We've been partners in the space for a long time. I was the guy that went down with him, helped build Origin House when it was called CRHC in 2014. So we work well together. He's a finance guy, top of the chain, years at Dundee, years in pharma, and I'm a capital markets, I should say I'm a cannabis guy first and foremost, but I understood capital markets from a retail point of view. I was never in the business. I was never a banker, broker, was not around the capital markets. I kind of came in from the outside. So I served as his due diligence, kind of his boots on the ground, and he served as that guy that can open any door, present M&A opportunities, open up financing opportunities. So we both have, literally million plus in the company. He's highly convicted. He's an insider owner, more than 10% of the company. So he's very much involved. He's an advisor. We speak often. He has the same sort of opinion that, cannabis came out loud and proud, way too much so. We knew he, like myself, shifted focus to the US as soon as Canada sort of turned on, because it got too wild too quick. and was exactly correct. And now he knows that, okay, now's the time. Now, here we are 4.5 years later, and now's the time to invest in Canadian cannabis. There's been 5 years of waste, of
Yeah.
banging your head against the wall, and 5 years leading up to that, if you remember, more like 10 years, but it's been 15 years of practice. So Mark is a seasoned vet. He's a pro. He's qualified. He's the money guy. I'm the ops guy. With Josh, we have the ultimate brand and product guy with Josh Taylor, who really created the brand in the first place. And I think the three of us together, I think we're pretty well connected in terms of resources and access and trust, and the ability to get into conversations in cannabis for us is good. And I think that, again, is, hate to say it, but you've got a lot of people in the space that just don't have that, I'll call it just like, again, a relevance or a familiarity. And like any industry, you want to work with people that are qualified. So I'd like to think we're a qualified group, and our board demonstrates that as well. We've got 3 independent directors that are probably among the top 3 known business/cannabis people in Canada. So good team to get done what we hope to do.
Yeah, most definitely. And, if we wanted to paint a picture of the cannabis landscape right now, I think you kind of gave us, a good idea of it. The last 10, 15 years, it was kind of like a hurricane blew through, circled back around, came through again one more time. Skies are starting to clear up a little bit. Clearly, there's a lot of catastrophic damage, all around, but it appears, the BC Bud Co. is that one of the few buildings that's still standing, so to speak, to use an analogy there. And it's going to present some very unique opportunities. And so what I want to kind of, give you an opportunity to share with us here is, in taking the marathon versus sprint approach, where does the company kind of go from here in terms of navigating a landscape that has been decimated over the past, few years, but that leaves unique opportunities there for the taking? How does the company assess opportunities that might be available, and understanding which ones are the ones to go after versus, maybe, hey, we'll take a pass on this and just keep going, until we find something else? What's the mentality here for the company as you move forward with your growth strategy?
Yeah, it's really multi-pronged. There's really 2 windows, and to be totally frank too, I think we are, in the grand scheme of things, we are still early, which is why we're not trying to be cute. As I mentioned, we're trying to just really prove out and survive. So I think one of 2 things are going to happen. We're going to either get to a place similar to Citizen Stash. We've got about 30 good listings pumping out decent volume every single month. Valens came along, paid $54 million for Citizen Stash just to buy that brand. They then shuttered the facility, sold it for $4 million that the company had paid almost 24. So we'll either get to a point in time where one of the largest can't ignore us. They go, we've got all this backed up product. These guys have these relevant, basically, packages on the shelf. We could essentially backfill and put our product in their branding, which is what's happened a lot through the space. So that's a very real near-term possibility. The second, and what I think we're going to achieve, is really try to be I'll say this humbly, a mini Berkshire. And what I mean by that is find the good 3 to 5 million a year top line mom and pops that have done well, that have self-funded, that are maybe at $1 million EBITDA. Buy 10 or 15 of those and have a really, really cool house of brands that will eventually get to dividend places. But focus first and foremost on the running of the business, the going concern, and utilizing that capital markets vessel that we have, the Pubco, for what it's intended, which is to eventually get our share price where our currency is liquid enough and attractive enough to bring somebody in all stock, and then start to just expand on that house of brands. So I think we have probably the best ROFR in the business in terms of a menu in front of us of all these options to buy. Really the right of first refusal on so many good things. But if we go back, use another cheesy quick analogy, if you go back to like the .com mania, we were pretty young, but in 99, 98, I was on Ask Jeeves searching on the internet.
Yeah.
Like by 2000, it was Yahoo. By 2001, 2002, everyone was on Google. The first 2 were dead. Then Google goes and buys YouTube, which no one thought, and then social media companies like Facebook are buying AI. So I think what I'm trying to say is that we had the Ask Jeeves day. We might even have had the Yahoo day. I think we're slowly going to start to get into like who of the .com, the mania came, the blow off occurred, 99% disappeared. Oracle, Microsoft, Intel, Google, Amazon, Yahoo, they all ascended off into the heavens because they didn't make stupid decisions during the mania. They didn't blow their brains out. So we're post mania, we're qualified, we're building brick by brick, and my very I know it's a very long answer again, but ultimately there's some amazing call it picks and shovels businesses that we're already in negotiation with that are very much exposed to this industry. With one, for example, has 200 LP clients that doesn't touch the plant. So there's some really cool cash flowing businesses available to us. So I'd like to think that we're going to use the Pubco as intended, continue the brand, build the brands, add to the house of brands, and see where the industry goes.
Yeah. And, last thing that I want to touch on here is the heritage of the BC Bud Co. I know you guys fly your heritage flag high and proud, and for good reason. It's a legacy marijuana name. So for folks out there, that maybe aren't as familiar with the brand itself and the name, can I kind of give us a little bit of an understanding of the heritage and how that plays a role into the identity that you're carving out here for the BC Bud Co.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it goes back now, many decades, but it's a long story. I'll spare you as well. But I mean, BC has a long heritage of backcountry, highly passionate growers. Even UBC, the biggest university in British Columbia, is a gentleman there who unlocked the genome back in 1996, and that sort of took the entire global industry and really gapped it up. And things changed after that with some specific strains that were making its way down to California and beyond. So it always had this sort of cachet of, the people in the back hills of Squamish or Princeton or Nelson, up in the interior. It's just, there's such a long-standing legacy, a hippie legacy, frankly, I believe, that goes back to the draft dodgers. A lot of them came up to the Kootenays of British Columbia, which is kind of the call it the southeastern part, right over like Coeur d'Alene, Idaho type area. And that really became a mecca for hippies. And so cannabis was widely consumed and accepted, and a lot of people really nerded out and really went to town on how do we make the best in the world? What are some processes we can do? And so BC was a pioneer in many ways. I've been all over the world. Cannabis from BC is instantly regarded as quality. That's something I've consistently seen everywhere I've stepped all over the planet. Everyone has gone, oh, BC, good weed. So it has that little bit of a baked in marketing, you could say. So yes, of course, we're leveraging that. But more importantly, we've got Brian Taylor, for example, on our board. He's currently a mayor of Granite Forks, a big town in BC, small town, but a big part of BC. Second term mayor. He founded the BC Marijuana Party in 1996 when I was a kid. Another one of our directors started the first chain of hydroponic stores in 1993. So we have people that are directly a part of and have lived and breathed, and had passion for this plant and the properties of the plant and what it can do and how it can bring people together for combined, literally 100 years. So I'm pretty proud of that. I come from the Fraser Valley of BC, where, whether I wanted it or not, growing up as a kid, pot was everything. It was just, for whatever reason, it was totally entrenched into the fabric. Like a lot of areas will have drinking, we had a lot of cannabis consumption. Like I bought a blog in 2004 or 2008. It went live, cannabishealth.com, where I realized, wow, you can actually treat a heck of a lot of ailments using this one plant. And BC's always been really a kind of granola hippie. How do we sort of fight the man and big pharma and stay close to home, so to speak, and do what we can naturally and do it consciously and do what's good for the environment and good for our body and mind. And so I think there's a high level of trust globally. I think everyone in BC, again, feels sort of somewhat connected. So it's important to us to really, wear that, to own that. It's a huge responsibility. It's an awesome trademark. And I think it's a wicked brand that we first sat down years ago and said, I could see this on a really cool garment or a hat, or, it could expand out on so many things. We could have a really cool store in Whistler, just the BC Bud Co store with all of BC history. So I think we've really tied together a lot of the BC history. I was an MMAR patient in 2004. That was one of the first federal licenses. So I got to meet all the doctors in Canada that were prescribing pot at the time, got to speak all over the US with some of the biggest names. So we're guys that really fucking care about BC weed and about the industry, what it's done. It's a big business in BC and continue to be, I think will expand to be a big business globally. But for now, we're just, focusing on what we know and trying to make better something that we're already very familiar with.
Yeah, and to circle back to your conversation around the dot-com boom and Ask Jeeves and Yahoo and all that, I want to leave our listeners and viewers with kind of just a quick little story here because I think it's relevant. But yeah, I was a sophomore in high school in about around 1998, and my economics teacher, I'll never forget it. We were going through talking about the how the stock market works and all that, and he wrote up on the whiteboard the word Google, and he said, if you're going to look for a company that you ever want to get behind, this is it. And I remember at the time, Yahoo and Ask Jeeves were the big search engines. They were the ones that had the commercials on
Google was
TV.
weird. Google
Yeah,
was
Google was weird. Yeah,
yeah.
it was. And so, I often find myself wondering what happened to what happened to that teacher. Did he become a millionaire, billionaire? Who knows? But it was that foresight and being able to see something, that I think other people at that time weren't recognizing because they were so blinded by, the hype that Yahoo and Ask Jeeves, was creating. But beneath that, there was actually a company that was doing things the right way, that was adopting a mentality that was going to allow them to survive that bubble burst, so to speak. And so that's what I kind of look at, when I look at companies, particularly here in the cannabis space, also in the psychedelic space, which I also focus a lot on. And I love the fact that you guys do take that marathon versus sprint mentality, because I do think that wins out. And what I always tell people is, the objective is you want to make it to the finish line. You make it to the finish line, you take your winnings, your earnings, and then you put that into your next vehicle and you go run your next marathon. Doesn't matter if you cross the marathon with a Lamborghini or a 2005 Toyota Camry. The objective is getting across that finish line. So you may not be the sexiest out there, but the bottom line is you're doing things the right way. You're on track to win that race, win that marathon. And I think that's important. That's certainly something I want to leave our viewers and listeners out there with. And Brayden, if there's any closing statements or things that you want to leave our viewers and listeners with, please go ahead, because I've really enjoyed this conversation, by the way.
Cool. And likewise, and thank you, David. I think we're the same age. That's a really cool story. And I had one teacher say the same thing to me. Actually, the comment was back then was about Starbucks and caffeine, and then there was a war brewing. So they talked about Lockheed Martin. It's a long story, but I never forgot how they planted the seed for me when I was very young. I was like, the stock market. My parents never talked about the stock market. Yeah. So it's really cool when you have a teacher that exposed kids. I think that's awesome. And I hope that teacher had his bet placed. I really do. I guess I'll just close by saying, the difference between Google, obviously I'm not going to compare us to the founders of that company, but they were young, hungry, talented, brilliant, bordering on autistic, passionately going down with the ship founders. So what happened with cannabis, with big box cannabis, is a bunch of rounders and promoters raised a bunch of money, put it in a shell, found some doe-eyed, qualified CEO, jammed them in, gave them 300 grand a year, gave them 1 million options, and that CEO went out and said whatever they had to say. If the deal didn't work, everybody walked away. Nobody really paid the price. So I think what I'm trying to say is that as an investor, I look for companies where the founders are financially all in, they're down with the ship, they're going to let this thing destroy them, or they're going to spend their life building out the business. So there was an article years and years ago about the insider ownership of Pubco relative to performance. And it's not a shocker. Companies that have high insider bought stock, so founders that paid good money for their shares, that chart is far more insulated and protected from those disappearing, delisted, rolled back messes that we saw in cannabis. So that's, I guess, my final point is, we're here, we're young, we're hungry, we've done it before, we're going to do it bigger this time. And it's not a group of guys that are trying something, but rather a group of guys that are intentionally building something.
Yeah, and you got the experience to do it. So I commend you, and I look forward to continuing to follow the journey here for you guys. If any of our listeners or viewers out there have any questions as you're listening to this, please leave them in the comments. We'll get them over to Brayden and hopefully, get him back on here in the show. But Brayden, I want to thank you again, man. This was great. I really enjoyed the conversation and appreciate the time here.
Thank you very much for having me, David. Really appreciate it.
Look forward to having you back soon. So thanks again.
See you soon.
Thank you.